after the most historic election of our lifetime ever, the most important election of our lifetime, which we're now being told was probably not that important. uh, you know, I have a lot. There are a lot of takeaways, and it's hard to know where to start. But what we saw last night was a major repudiation of the corporate media, which had cleared the way for Kamala Harris by first destroying Joe Biden when it appeared that he was simply too elderly to continue, too senile to continue. And they thought they could market Kamala effectively to Americans without them relating to her. It was a repudiation of the Democratic Party's leadership, which has basically been a front for the oligarchy and Wall Street, which has fixed 3 successive primary elections. They fixed the primary in 2016 against Bernie Sanders. They fixed the primary in 2020 against Bernie Sanders again, with Obama behind the curtain. And then they fixed it again against Joe Biden to give us Kamala Harris. And there was never any democracy. So it frustrated people within the Democratic Party grassroots. It was a repudiation of resistance liberalism, which emerged from the ashes of Hillary Clinton's campaign through a coalition between Hillary Clinton dead-enders and the national security state to delegitimize Donald Trump by painting him as a Russian puppet, creating this coalition between the Bush-era neocons and the Democratic Party elite. And they thought that they could roll out Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and put that one over on people, and that we'd all forget and think that this was just about some noble Republicans putting the Constitution and principle over party, and that everybody would forget about the horrors of the Iraq War and the ruin that they caused our country. And they were repudiated as well. And it was a repudiation of the Democratic Party as a vehicle for the Israel lobby's bipartisan control over the U.S. government, because of the organization, not just of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, but people who were so horrified by the Biden and Harris sponsored genocide and the air bridge of baby buster bombs being delivered day in and day out to Tel Aviv. And we saw in Dearborn, Jill Stein, I think, actually finished second over Kamala Harris, second to Donald Trump in an area that Joe Biden won in 2020. I think he won 80% of the vote there. So this is just a total repudiation for business as usual.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, I can't hear. Yeah, it's a total repudiation of the Democratic Party establishment, but I don't think they'll learn a damn thing from it. I think they're just going to continue with the same strategy as soon as they pick up the pieces and decide to mount another national campaign. And they really, I mean, if you talk to liberals who are crying today, having meltdowns and, or posting pictures of themselves crying in the bathroom, they were out of touch and out of step with the country, with the streets, especially with young people who are getting their news from social media and who have never really received any material benefit after any election from any president, but can remember that the economy was somewhat better under Trump, was significantly better under Trump. Young people who suffered under COVID, under the lockdowns, under this whole oppressive regime that actually did nothing to stop the spread, who saw like parts of their youth be sacrificed. That issue was never talked about in this election, but they were furious. They're not offended by everything the way that elite liberals are. They have a sense of humor. Nothing has been delivered to them materially. So they have a choice between some clearly managed retail politician who is cooked up in a focus group, who had never won a single delegate before, despite running this really expensive campaign in 2020, and Donald Trump, who everyone knows, who is kind of a troll, who says some hilarious things, goes off script all the time, and pisses off all the people that young people can't stand, basically the establishment. And so they chose him, and they're not expecting him to deliver some economic miracle for them. They just chose him because the alternative was so ghastly and honestly kind of an insult to them.
He is a giant FU. He is that human Molotov cocktail that Michael Moore talked about in 2016, though not in 2024. He is unscripted. I thought his acceptance address last night was pretty exceptional. His campaigning in Michigan, for obvious self-serving reasons, was outstanding. He was lambasting the Biden-Harris administration's role in the genocide in Gaza. Which Donald Trump, therefore, will turn up on January 20? Will it be the one that turned up in 2016 with the worst creatures of the swamp sitting around the table with him? Or will it, with Elon Musk, with Tucker Carlson, with Tulsi Gabbard, with RFK Jr., will it be a different kind of Donald Trump, do you think?
Well, it does appear that RFK and these figures actually did benefit Trump at the polls. The New York Times now has a headline, "Populist Revolt Against Elite's Vision of the U.S." That's on the front page. And the Trump's victory changes America's sense of itself. But the populist revolt could turn into another Trump administration in which Donald Trump is continually besieged in his war room with Steve Bannon, trying to fight off lawfare attempts while national security elites dictate his foreign policy and anything positive he attempts to do. For example, what he attempted to do in Korea, uniting the Korean Peninsula, bringing peace after decades and decades of division, would boomerang because of the presence of national security elites, warmongers that he allows into his administration. So right now you have Mike Pompeo expecting to either return to the CIA, Secretary of State, maybe Secretary of Defense, to play a major role in the bureaucracy of the Trump administration, a warmonger, someone who aligns with the Christian Zionists and neoconservatives, and who spoke at Trump's final rally and touted his loyalty to Trump, to loud applause from the crowd. So he's expecting to be inside the building. So are figures possibly like Marco Rubio, little Marco, who Trump denigrated, but who now is displaying fealty to Trump and might want to be Secretary of State. Rubio is a China hardliner. He is obviously obsessed with regime change in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and just a Monroe Doctrine towards Latin America. And he's an ultra-Zionist. He's a major tool of the Israel lobby. Behind Trump, you have Miriam Adelson, who pledged $100 million to a pro-Trump super PAC. She's basically an Israeli intelligence asset. Jared Kushner, the son-in-law, same thing, mastermind of the Abraham Accord. But then you do have the sort of populist wing that is skeptical of wars and that speaks more for Trump's hardcore base, Tucker Carlson being one example. And I think we're going to see factional division and massive infighting over the policy direction of a Trump administration. RFK is also going to vie for control over some of the agencies vis-a-vis agricultural policy, the FDA, as well as taking on big pharma, which has been sort of RFK's major cause for the last decade. So we will see enormous institutional inertia against these figures who benefited Trump at the polls and represent his base more than I think Mike Pompeo does.
Oh, for sure. Indeed, Carlson called Pompeo a criminal and called him out for his plan to murder our friend Julian Assange on the streets of London. So the coming struggle for Donald Trump will be one to watch, and I know that we'll both be watching it closely. Finally, Max, and I'm sorry we don't have more time, the one thing you can say is this is extremely bad news for little Zelensky, the crook of Kiev. His notice has been served, hasn't it?
Well, I think his goose was cooked no matter who won. The war is so clearly failing. The Biden White House has been leaking on Zelensky, for example, that he attempted to acquire Tomahawk missiles. I mean, every week there's new leaks in U.S. media that are pouring out of the Biden administration. So I think they're fed up with this guy, too. And you have a problem where Donald Trump was impeached for attempting to at least elicit some sort of trade-off for delivering offensive weapons to Ukraine. And remember, Barack Obama actually was the one who refused to give the Javelin missiles to Ukraine, refused to give the offensive weaponry because the Minsk Accords forbade that. And Donald Trump ultimately delivered that under so much pressure from the three-letter agencies and all the spooks and national security goons that had surrounded him. And then he was impeached because he wanted dirt on Hunter Biden in exchange for it. So it made it much harder for Donald Trump to actually impede all of the momentum towards the proxy war that erupted in 2022, even though he wanted to. And J.D. Vance has been very outspoken, Trump's VP, about the need to cut off military aid to Ukraine and, in his words, just stop the killing, which is absolutely the right approach. So again, I'm worried that if Trump and Vance attempt to do the right thing, they will be portrayed inside the Beltway by corporate media and the national security state, what they call the deep state, as defeatists, defeatists colluding with Russia, and it will lead to some new scandal that could actually prolong the war with the Newlandites operating in the background. That's what I'm worried about. Whereas if you had someone like Kamala Harris in there that had the backing of the national security state to slowly create an off-ramp from this war, there wouldn't have been as much noise in Washington. So we're going to have a huge clash over, I think this will be one of the biggest clashes in the next 6 months, in the 6 months after Trump enters office, over ending this failed, disastrous war and stopping the killing, which I think Ukrainians now want.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great meme going around of Zelensky talking to Kamala Harris saying, now you know why we didn't have presidential elections. I know it's early yet, but speaking as someone who completely correctly predicted last night's result on air, on the mother of all talk shows, I think that J.D. Vance will be the next president. Pete Buttigieg seems to be limbering up for the Democratic nomination. What about a new generation after this one? Clearly needed, isn't it?
Well, Buttigieg would be a disastrous pick for the Democrats. And J.D. Vance seems to be waiting in the wings because there cannot be anyone nominated for a Republican presidential candidate who doesn't stand in Trump's shadow. Trump has completely taken over the Republican Party. In many ways, he transcends the Republican Party. He's sort of a party unto himself. And that's why he chose J.D. Vance as his VP pick. Not because Vance was necessarily going to be the best person on the stump, but because Vance was the person he wanted to succeed him. But for all we know, it could be Don Jr. And with the Democrats, they need a complete overhaul. It's not going to be possible. They need an ideological overhaul. They need to spit out the neocons. They need to start articulating what they actually believe in, and they themselves need a transcendent figure like Trump, who isn't just some retail politician or some sort of previously unknown figure that they try to grow in a lab, which is what Pete Buttigieg represents. I mean, what did this guy do? He was the mayor of a small city in Indiana, and they just brought him in out of nowhere because they thought he would be the next Obama, the openly gay Obama. He'd be our first gay president. People are fed up with that.